Good evening, everyone. Grace and peace. How good and excellent it is when all God's children dwell together in unity. We're so grateful to see everyone this evening and those who are with us online. We want to welcome all of you to Louisville Presbyterian Theological Seminary. This week, we are journeying together with our Black Church Studies consultation. Our theme this year is Turn to Your Neighbor. We have engaged worship. We have prepared a revival that was deeply impactful at Bates Memorial Baptist Church. And on this evening, as is custom with years past, we are so delighted to welcome the Reverend Dr. Justin Reed as our 2026 Edwards Lecturer. On behalf of the Black Church Studies Program and the entire community, of Louisville Seminary, we welcome you for this important lecture. So we encourage you to open your mind, your hearts, and your spirits. And if you are already registered, we invite you to join us tomorrow for our consultation conference day. At this time, with great delight, it is an honor to introduce all of you to President Andrew Palmerville, who will come with remarks and to share a little bit more with our Edwards Lecture history. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Prelo. Good evening, folks. I am delighted to be here with you physically in the Wynn Center at Louisville Presbyterian Theological Seminary, and for all of you who are online joining us today for our Edwards Lecture. I am equally excited to hear Dr. Justin Reed, who will be delivering tonight's lecture. We have had a very packed and enjoyable week so far, challenging, wonderful speakers, an opportunity for us to gather as community, and really to reflect on our theme this year for our Black Church consultation. We conclude tomorrow, but truly the conversations, the learnings that we've had, the opportunity to be community together, this continues well beyond what we do during this week. I am particularly thankful for all of the leadership that has been shown by Dr. Presavia Prelo and her outstanding team in the Black Church Studies Department and the Black Church Cornerstone Collaborative. The folks who are in the room here tonight, I see Rob. Are there others from the team who are here? Well, Rob, you get all the applause to yourself then, too. So, thank you. And I also want to give a very special thank you to the Edwards family tonight who are watching from Germany. So it is either midnight or 11 o'clock. I hope I have my time zones correct, but they are joining us. What's that? Do I have it? Midnight, I think. 6-hour difference? It's a 12-hour difference between Louisville and Germany. Well, I think 6 hours difference from Germany. but hello, folks. Either way, well done. And traditionally, the Edwards Peacemaking Lectureship has been coupled with our Black Church Studies consultation because of the shared focus on peace and social justice. The Edwards Peacemaking Lectureship honors Dr. George Edwards and his wife, Jean. Dr. Edwards, an alum of Louisville Seminary from the class of 1951, also served the seminary for 27 years as professor of New Testament. Dr. Edwards died June 2nd, 2010. Together, Dr. and Mrs. Edwards shared a ministry that was active in Christian efforts for peace and social justice. Established in 1986, the Edwards Peacemaking Lectureship Endowment supports a visiting lecturer to teach a special course or programs. And tonight, we are delighted to have one of our very own who will be offering our lectureship tonight. In order to introduce tonight's lecturer, I will invite Dean Deborah Mumford to come forward and to present tonight's Edward Lectureship. Dean Mumford.
Good evening, everyone. So one note before introducing the lecturer. Immediately after the lecture, we'll have about a 15 to 20 minute question and answer period. So this is a reminder to jot down any questions that come up for you during the lecture so you don't forget them. You want to make sure they get addressed during that period. It is my pleasure to introduce our 2026 Edwards Lecturer, our own Dr. Justin Michael Reed. Dr. Reed serves as the Associate Professor of Old Testament here at Louisville Seminary. He's been a member of our faculty since 2018. He earned a PhD in Biblical Studies and Old Testament from Princeton Theological Seminary, a Master of Theological Studies from Harvard Divinity School, and a Bachelor of Arts from Stanford University. Since joining the LPTS faculty, Justin has become a valued and beloved member of this community. In addition to being a popular teacher, he has served the community in many different capacities, such as chairing the Cultural Diversity and Vision and Values committees. He demonstrates his willingness to think outside of the box as a scholar and educator by convening his classes in a local congregation and developing videos to explain biblical interpretation on YouTube in language that is non-academic for just regular folk. In 2020, he was awarded a Wabash Symposium Becoming Anti-Racist and Catalyst for Change grant. In cooperation with the Cultural Diversity Committee, he led our community in conversations and trainings about how to be anti-racist. This work also included a review of all of our policy manuals and practices. Last year, he was the winner of the 2025 Manfred Lautenschläger Award for Theological Promise. This award annually honors 10 young scholars from all over the world for outstanding dissertations. 20 reviewers from 15 countries select the awardees. On March 3rd at noon, we will celebrate with Justin the publication of the book developed from this dissertation, The Injustice of Noah's Curse. The title of Dr. Reed's 2026 Edwards Lecture is Ancient Texts, Modern Interpretations, and Political Relevance. Dr. Reed will explore pressing questions and obstacles biblical scholars face when drawing from ancient texts and their modern interpretations in ways that are relevant to political issues, inclusion, and mutual concern. Just as Justin is a beloved and valued member of the Louisville Seminary community, so too are his sons, Jordan and Justice, and his spouse, Catherine, who grace us with their presence often. Let us welcome our 2026 Edwards Lecturer, Dr. Justin Michael Reed. Very nice.
You want it over here? There we go. Thank you. Can you hear me well? Yes. All right. That was a great introduction. I feel very important. Thank you to President Palmerville. Thank you to Dean Mumford, to Dr. Prelo, to Cora, to Erica Bledsoe, to everyone who was on the academic committee and anyone else involved in me having the honor of presenting this Edwards Lecture. As President Palmerville mentioned, the Edwards Lecture has to do with themes of justice and peace, and these are important ideas in the way that I teach, in what I'm passionate about, in what I write, and so it's really special for me to have this platform to talk to you. So, before I give much of a real introduction to what I'm going to be talking about, I have a clip from a movie I want you to watch. Well, I want you to watch the clip from the movie. Yeah. Assuming that you're familiar with stories from the Bible, I want you to try to think as you watch. If you can figure out what story it comes from. If you can't, that's fine. I'm going to explain it afterwards. And the other thing I want you to think about as you watch is what stands out to you as you watch this clip. There are subtitles to read. You probably won't be able to understand what they say, so there's subtitles.
Musano koile bumumbara lelaye.
Mimaka barala.
Musolea. Ikelembe ki demso bla mumbara lelaye. Muso. Ni furchef manife alamna.
Hera kanga Yakuba. Ketane boloble. Chera madelika kenefe. Wafatene de ubatuguni. Nani fura na makaka sisa.
Nyesa ulo bla bara de ki faye. Ki sera furula. Ngonya.
Dina. Fininku. Akofoka je. Joli terega kabo arasel de Yusufu ka finina. Antorola. Ko kelim bambali. Akalo mugafle ni. Ifa kema ka on sigini sanga ngoro. Akalo mugafle. Ifa magota musula. Adomu yoli yolla ko falato. Yusufu sara. Atina ble. Warau ya fara. Sanga bana. Ode ato ne ko wonde ka bambato ka fini ko ka joli bala. Ma wara ka tatnyei.
Ye Yusuf tikati don strafle. Idon segera kana ka bo baga unge hero la ti kantoma. Anfa Yusuf sara. Anfa kungo wara jugo ye Yusuf fara. Ika lonka fone Yakuba no sanga sigi. Muso. Ki donga Yusuf su segima. Nere bolo na joluko ka jol fini ko ka tla ka sutura. Mafle. Bitu ko puguri kan tige fla fana ye. Ka nyando na ye. Yasi ka don ko foi le tise abada. Ka ne Yakuba boni sangala sigila.
All right. So, I like classroom participation. Who in here has a degree, a seminary degree? Raise your hand. Who in here has read at least like the first book of the Bible? All right. What story did we just see a snippet of? What story is that? Anybody? Yes, Amariah.
They wouldn't say they sold him into slavery. In fact, they say he died.
Mm-hmm.
And Jacob is still in mourning.
Thank you. So we see Jacob, that's the older man that we see here, who refers to himself as a father, who they refer to as father. And this is the aftermath of Jacob having learned that Joseph, his favorite son, is gone. There was a deception where he's supposed to get the impression that that Joseph is dead. And the way that he's communicating about it, I'm not sure that he's been completely deceived, but he knows that Joseph is gone. Who in here has a degree in marriage and family therapy, knows something about grief and mourning? So, family systems, right? So, this clip is from a film by Sheikh Umar Sissoko, and it's called Genesis, or there's a French title to it, La Genèse. What did you notice? What stood out to you in watching this clip?
Skin color.
Skin color stood out to you. One of the first things, and I'm going to jump into this, one of the first things that might jump out to you is what Adrian mentioned, the skin color of the people involved in this retelling of part of the Bible. This film takes a few stories from Genesis and weaves them together. So what Amariah mentioned is from Genesis 37. That's when Jacob, that's the whole story in Genesis 37 of Joseph being almost killed and then sold into slavery. But Sissoko also brings into the same dynamic Dinah's story. You saw Dinah in this? Dinah's story is from Genesis 34. And that story is one where the only named daughter of Jacob, he's got 12 sons that are named, he's got one daughter that's named in the Bible. she suffers rape from Shechem. It's a very difficult and violent story that includes a genocidal attack. So Sissoko is taking this difficult story of grief. He's weaving it into this other story of violence. And he's also bringing another story in the background. Jacob and Esau, twin brothers who are in conflict with each other. And what Sissoko is doing is he's got Esau in the scene before. This is one of the first scenes of the movie. Right before this, we see Esau is watching what's going on. No one knows. No one sees Esau. Esau's in the mountains, and he's looking down. He sees what's happening. And throughout the movie, Esau is plotting and getting ready for his revenge. He thinks God is on his side, and that's what his mission is. So it's a very interesting movie. There's a lot to take out of it. What I'm going to do today with this film is I'm not going to go deep into what's happening in this movie, but I'm going to use clips from it as a jumping off point for discussing a few things. So first, keeping with the theme of the Black Church Studies consultation, I'm going to bring up these topics of inclusion, justice, and mutual concern. And so clips from this will give me a chance to talk about each of those. The second thing is that as I bring up these topics, I'm going to weave them into the context of African American biblical hermeneutics or African American biblical scholarship, Black biblical studies. There's different terms for the same thing. But this is the academic study of the Bible that's happening in a certain way that I'm going to define a little later in this lecture. That has to do with African Americans. So I'm going to bring all that together. Now, I see former students here. I know there's people who have degrees, and I also know there's people in the audience for whom the study of Black biblical studies is completely new to you. So I'm going to do something that might be not totally wise. Do you know the Aesop fable where there's a father and a son, and they go on a trip with their donkey, and then they see some people, and they're like, oh, why do you have that poor boy walking by himself? So he puts the son on the donkey. And then they say, another group says, oh, why is the old man walking while the young man is on the donkey? So they switch, and now the dad's on the donkey. And then someone says, look at that poor donkey having to carry that big old person. And so the two of them lift up the donkey and start walking around, right? So I'm going to try something like that. Understanding that there's a spectrum from people for whom this topic is completely new all the way to people who have contributed in defining ways to the discipline of African American biblical hermeneutics, I'm going to try to please everyone. The way I'm going to go about that is by introducing some things, but also turning towards the end to a few critical questions about the discipline that might not be relevant to someone who's just hearing this for the first time. So I'm going to try to put all that together. So Adrian mentioned one of the first things that people notice, their skin color, and that gives me a chance to go off into describing what African American hermeneutics is and a little bit of its introduction. Because when you watch this, what you see is these are people from Mali who are representing the biblical characters. They're Africans. Their setting evokes African social systems. They're wearing clothing and other adornments, speaking a language, and engaging in gestures that an audience will readily recognize as African. And for many people, this is a powerful break from Eurocentric norms, Eurocentric assumptions of how we should envision the Bible. So, let me jump from this to talking about some of the origins of African American biblical hermeneutics as an academic discipline. You recognize this picture? Anyone know where this picture is taken? Lorraine Mortel. The date? Everyone studied and prepared for this lecture. So, Dr. King is assassinated at the Lorraine Motel, April 4th, 1968, and there's different reactions that people are familiar with. One of the reactions across the country is student protest, students demanding different things from their institutions of higher learning, get new zeal. They push for the things that in many cases they've been fighting for years. And those institutions, they make adjustments accordingly. So one of the places where this happens in the aftermath of King's assassination is the Interdenominational Theological Center in Atlanta, Georgia. And it's there that Charles B. Cofer is an Old Testament professor who's serving as dean. And Cofer says that the student demands for the institution to change, their demands were a critique of their faculty for the school's irrelevance to the black experience. And so the pressure that Cofer felt caused him to respond with a change of course in his career. And he called it a conversion, a new birth for him. That's how he described this change. He changed from a Eurocentric perspective that he'd been trained in to a decision to adopt an Afrocentric perspective. He'd been black his whole life, but now, now he's going to be intentional about an Afrocentric perspective. So by a Eurocentric perspective, I mean that the education he'd received was presented as objective truth, but at the same time, it would prioritize methods for deciding what is good evidence or what is true, narratives of history, a canon of literature, and presumably interests, shared interests, that come from and are connected to Euro-descended people. That's that Eurocentric norm that he'd been trained in and had adopted for himself. And this conversion was him learning to adopt an Afrocentric norm that's not just the opposite, because it didn't start with, for him, this idea of objectivity anymore. It was a self-conscious decision to be subjective in saying, I'm intentionally going to look at things with methods that have some relation to African-descended people, with narratives of history, a canon of literature, and presumably shared interests of African-descended people. So that was the change that he went through. And describing Charles Cofer is often done in talking about the beginning of African-American hermeneutics, not because he's a singular founder of the discipline, but because he's one of the first people engaging in African-American hermeneutics. And I like to start with him because his story, in the way that he describes it himself, brings up two important points for me. One is that African-American hermeneutics is a choice. So, Cofer's conversion experience happened with his decision on how he was going to respond to the pressure from these students. All writing or teaching by African-American biblical scholars in the past or the present, which included 2 decades of his career up until that point, isn't African-American hermeneutics. Just because it's done by someone who's black doesn't mean it takes those perspectives. And so Cofer decided to champion a certain agenda, and I'm going to explain more of what that looks like as we go on. Part of the big point of what that looks like, the other point is what prompted this change was his students saying, be relevant. And that is a central idea in African-American hermeneutics. In this subset of biblical scholarship, relevance is key. Vincent Wimbush is a New Testament scholar who has a reputation for important theoretical work and important work in recovering the interpretations by black people. And he was honored with being the president of the Society of Biblical Literature. There's a different president every year. It's an honor that keeps changing. And when he was in, I think it was 2010 or 2011, in his address he said, the Society of Biblical Literature, founded in 1880, had a long history of not having black people in it. Black people earning PhDs in it. And it's not because of explicit policies to reject them so much as because in a society at large, not the Society of Biblical Literature, but the world of the U.S., in society at large, where black people are facing such dehumanizing persecution, their inclusion in this realm would have been possible if the Society of Biblical Literature was, as he said, talking about something. And as long as they weren't talking about nothing, it didn't attract those voices. So the aftermath of this moment is when that shift happens. So given this background, with this overall emphasis on talking about something, what is African American hermeneutics? It is a sub-discipline of biblical scholarship that is concerned with meanings of Scripture, its interpreters, and the context of both. And it follows a liberating agenda that's informed by, and here's the reason why it's African American, it's informed by Afro-diasporic history, experiences, and culture. So that's the definition of what I'm talking about, what we're getting into today. So, coming back to Adrian's point on what he saw, the reason why I can use this film as a jumping off point, even though it's not African American criticism, it's not an academic work, it's a film by someone from Africa. It gives me a chance to talk about some things, and here's one of them. Inclusion in terms of representation. Kofor, who I introduced as a sort of founding father in terms of him being early in African American hermeneutics, saw inclusion in the form of black representation as super important. That's because he knew about different forms of racist, anti-black ideas that had a legacy of damage still happening. So, who's heard of the Curse of Ham before? Curse of Ham, yes, you've written about it, yeah. I've written about it, yeah. The Curse of Ham comes from a couple texts combined. If we look at Genesis 10, verse 6, this is part of a chapter that describes Noah's children. If the flood wipes out everyone, then Noah's children are the beginning of humanity again. In this context, Ham is one of Noah's 3 sons, and Ham has kids named Cush, which is often interpreted as Ethiopia, Mitzrayim, which is Egypt, and Put, which is often interpreted as Libya or Somalia. That's 3 in Africa, Ham's kids. Ham has a 4th kid, Canaan. Canaan is the same place as Palestine or Israel, as close as you can get to Africa without being on the continent, right? So those are Ham's kids. So then if you go one chapter before that to Genesis 9, there's a story, it's a weird one, where Noah says a curse in response to something that Ham does. And the curse that Noah says is a curse of slavery. This curse of Ham interpretation is one that says, well, if, let's say it's 1850, and somebody looks around, they say, I see slavery, and I believe in the Bible. And the people who are enslaved are from Africa. And in my Bible, it says Ham's children are from Africa. And Ham is involved in this incident where there's a curse of slavery. I'm going to put all that together. And the most innocent way that somebody would do it is to say, well, I guess that's just what happened. And the most nefarious way is to say, this is God's will, and I must justify it and defend it and make it happen. That's the curse of Ham interpretation. Kofor knew about that interpretation. Kofor knew that there was the mark of Cain interpretation. This idea, Genesis 4, you all know Cain and Abel and how that brotherly story ends. After Cain kills his brother, he's punished by God, and God says, you're going to be banished. Cain says, oh, that's more than I can bear. And Cain says he's scared. Somebody, I don't know who he's thinking about, but somebody might harm him. And so God says, no, I'm going to put a mark on you. Genesis 4:15, I'm going to put a mark on you so that you don't get harmed. And even though in context that might sound like grace, the interpretation, the mark of Cain interpretation, comes from people who are saying, all right, people look different from each other. Where does dark skin come from? Oh, maybe it came from this mark on Cain. That's the origin of black people. They come from the first killer, the first homicide, right? Cofer knew about that interpretation. Cofer knew about polygenesis. In the 1600s, there were some interpreters who were looking at the Bible and said, you know, I'm looking at the world. I see more diversity than I've ever known before. Maybe this diversity comes from multiple creation events. Maybe all humanity doesn't go back to one family, Adam and Eve. Maybe there were these human-like creatures created in different places. And then that idea, there were some reasons why Christians pushed back on that idea at the time, but eventually in certain circles it did catch on, and in certain scientific circles outside of the use of the Bible, it also caught on in some places. And so it's the idea that black people were created separately from the best humans or the only real humans who were white. Polygenesis. So Cofer knew about that idea. And the Hamitic hypothesis, or the Hamitic myth, sometimes called the New Hamitic hypothesis, this idea has at its root the concept that all civilization is uniquely the legacy of white people. And so, if you happen to stumble upon something impressive, who made it? White people. And so with the Hamitic hypothesis, they must explain why the pyramids in North Africa and the structures in Great Zimbabwe in Southern Africa all came from white people. And so the Hamitic hypothesis includes creative ways to get across that there's an invading civilized group who came and did this, that you novices who don't know anything about science might see different skin colors and fullness of lip and curly hair and say, well, those people are obviously black, and the expert will say, no, look at the shape of their skull, look at the slant of their face, that's a dark-skinned Caucasian, civilized, who made these things. So Cofer knew about all this, and he didn't laugh. He worked to debunk those. Maybe he laughed, I don't know. He worked to debunk these type of interpretations with a quest to find the black presence in the Bible and the ancient world. That's what he was about. Inclusion by finding the black presence to show black people were not absent, nor were they always slaves in the history of the world or in the Bible. Now, what Cofer was doing in biblical scholarship had some people who were doing the same thing, but not a lot. And there's some reasons that, and I've taught my students about this. If you want to ask later, I can explain this. But there's some reasons why people have pointed out weaknesses with his approach. It wasn't always adopted. But outside of those small circles of conversations among academics, those very important circles, in the rest of the world, there were ways in which what he was doing was very attractive. People who have been lied to by white people in power about this meta-narrative of history seek another explanation. People who are in the midst of questions of identity where communities are saying, no, look, my brother, you got to be Muslim because that's the white man's religion. People are looking for, well, is it? Is there any evidence that it's got a longer history of being connected to black people? And so that sort of thing made the pursuit that Cofer was doing in academic circles also popular, also attractive to people in churches and in the community at large. Now, that's one of the ways of inclusion, looking for the black presence that is important considering the legacies of the Curse of Ham, the Mark of Cain, polygenesis, and the Hamitic hypothesis. By the 1970s, all of those things had been debunked, but they weren't gone because grandparents still teach their kids the same things they learned, because old books that were published by the most renowned scholars keep getting quoted, sometimes naively including the same wrong information. So Kofor said we got to keep fighting against this, and that's what he was about. Now, what else did you notice in that clip? What else stood out maybe that was different from what was in the Bible? Because I know you were studying it before you came here. Wasn't just, yes? I couldn't have planned this better myself. The film that we just watched gave a platform, a voice, emotions, a perspective to female characters that get half a line in the whole chapter of Genesis 37. Genesis 37 says that, in Genesis 37 verse 35 says that Jacob could not be consoled by his sons or daughters. It's the only mention of the females that are part of this family system. But here, Sissoko says, when I have a chance to show this, I'm going to include Dinah. I'm going to include Leah. And see, imaginatively, what their place in this story might be. So, another form of inclusion coming from African American scholarship, African American biblical interpretation, has to do with women. There's several definitions of womanist interpretation, and I'm not going to get into the differences between them, the strengths and weaknesses of different definitions. Again, that's something you can ask about if you're curious. But what I want to do, this picture is from the cover of Renita Weems' book, Just a Sister Away. She published it 2 times, about 15 years apart. This one is from 1988. And in that book, she uses the term womanist to describe what she's doing. And she says, Just a Sister Away is an audacious attempt to probe beneath the surface of biblical text to discover a place for everyone in the kingdom. The intent is to explore the uncharted territory of stories that could give us clues as to what biblical women felt about their lives. Overall, Weems' scholarship is privileging the perspective of black women. At the same time, she, like many womanist biblical interpreters after her, is, or that follow in her footsteps, she's still doing her thing, is concerned with a place for everyone. She's concerned with a place for everyone. And that idea that she's concerned with a place for everyone is a reason that womanist scholarship tends to develop what's called an intersectional lens. That means looking at how oppression happens in different ways based on the intersection of oppression based on different forms of identity. Not just based on gender, not just based on gender and race, but can include things like class, sexuality, disability, and other forms of groupness. And so, in the biblical scene that you just saw, there's no, like Weems does in Just a Sister Away, Sissoko's film wrestles the stories of women from the narrow focus of just looking at the male characters. Yes, these women in the story are still trapped in a patriarchal system, but in the clip, we get to see Leah and Dinah speak. We get to see what Weems describes in her own work as creative reconstructions of the possible emotions and issues that motivated biblical women in their relations with each other. So, I hope you can see some of the reason why this theme of inclusion in terms of well-researched representation of black people in the ancient world and in terms of attention to the experiences of women and girls has been an important step in biblical studies and valuable outside of academic spaces. I also wonder if you can see that Leah looks like she's related to Anthony Edwards. Am I the only one who thinks that? Yeah, okay. Aside from the 4 racist foundational beliefs that were mentioned before, the type of representation that we've looked at helps debunk, aside from those 4 things that Kofor was working to debunk, there's also the work of counteracting the oppression faced by women today. Overall, Weems' scholarship, next page. There's an attack on diversity, equity, and inclusion that's going on in terms of policies and as a dog whistle to point a finger and say, well, if something goes wrong, I can say it's because of black women who are incompetent DEI hires, right? There's mass layoffs, cuts to government funding for so many institutions where black women were overrepresented. There's healthcare prices on the rise. There's the highest courts strip away women's rights. Those with power and influence are covering up or explaining away long-standing abuse of women and girls. And we see government agents fatally shoot a woman and fatally shoot a man trying to protect a woman. And these are all the type of problems that we're facing today that suggest an intersectional approach trying to think about what's best for everyone while focusing on the perspectives of black women has value right now, has relevance right now. So now, this is the part where I go a little bit deeper than just introducing what's happening in the discipline. So things get a little more complicated. Although we can see the value, there's reasons to be critical. Ruha Benjamin, a Princeton professor of African American studies, gave a commencement address last year, 2025, at Spelman, in which she said, black faces in high places are not going to save us. Then she proceeded to point out examples of black women with power who have implemented policies of over-policing, black women with power who have abetted genocide in Palestine. And her point in saying that was to show how a politics that calls for us to pay attention to only representation can miss the importance of focusing on interests. And we can't presume that we all win when there's victories for someone that shares our skin color. What Benjamin said in that address is similar to what Aubrey Hendricks, who we're going to get the chance to hear from tomorrow, said back in the 90s to biblical scholars. He said, not simply proclaiming that Pharaoh was African is Afrocentric, but also that he was an oppressor. The focus on models and issues of liberation and domination in the Bible for the express purpose of raising an oppressed people's bibliocentric consciousness is necessary. It's not just who's dark and who ain't, but on what side of the power equation they stand. This was Hendricks pushing for a corrective to what Kofor was already doing. So, in other words, what these critical voices are saying is that we need to ask so what questions, not just focus on inclusion for the sake of seeing or celebrating who's black and who's female, but asking so what. And that has pushed the discipline forward. And since the 90s, there's been plenty, I would say most biblical scholars in African American criticism have taken heed to this point. And so it's common in their scholarly publications to think about issues of power. And outside of those scholarly publications, somebody like Will Gaffney has produced writing aimed for churches, aimed for people who aren't just in those small conversations, that does an excellent job at going beyond just identifying with black women and girls, but also asks whose interests are served and what are the power dynamics involved in the interactions of biblical characters, in different interpretations, and in things that are both present and historical. So I want to add one more wrinkle to this. I wonder about the benefit of treating class differently in an intersectional analysis, treating class differently from race and gender. Currently, in plenty of interpretations that I think are valuable, I'm not saying these are, I'm including some of the things I've published too. Plenty of interpretations that I think are valuable in their own right. You see scholars pointing out things about class like Jesus' class status among the least, the have-nots, the enslaved. Scholars noting the obstacles to inclusion that happen because character is in a oppressed class status and somebody has a bias against that. Critiques of interpreters who have classist biases that impede them from seeing certain things in the text. I think that that's valuable, but at the same time, in all of these instances, the focus on class is like our focus on race and gender. We want more compassion and an elimination of discrimination for different identities. But what if we treat class differently from race or gender or sexuality, and we say, what might the practice of attending to class in African American hermeneutics in an intersectional perspective look like if we say a better ideal is eliminating economic inequality rather than focusing on class discrimination? Not a more polite way to treat people across the differences of economic inequality, but saying, leveling things out, getting rid of ideas of meritocracy and that a polite system makes the system good, even if it's very unequal. So again, I'm asking this question not only of others, but also of myself and thinking about some of my past publications. With this different vision of liberation for this particular thing, class, I'm wondering what biblical scholarship might look like. All right, another clip. What's the time up there that I'm supposed to stop? Let's say, okay. Yeah, I don't know what the time was when I started, so. 7. Yeah, 7. I meant to introduce this. I'm just going to start talking. These three are Hamor, that's the father of Shechem, and two people who are his advisors, so to speak. Hamor's son, Shechem, is the one who raped Dinah. Jacob is in that tent. Jacob is Dinah's father. In the aftermath of this injustice, they have different ideas of how to solve the situation. It's hard to read that, isn't it? Jacob, son of Abraham, the prophet. Correct. Hamor, son of Canaan, father of nations. Jacob, son of Noah, our father. Hamor, my cousin. Indeed so. That's how it should be. When two princes of ancient times recognize and honor each other, they perpetuate wisdom. Have my brothers come in peace? I'm here on account of a woman. Can there be peace when a woman's involved? Jacob, our brother, we're here for your daughter, Dinah, your treasure. Jacob, your daughter, Dinah, your gazelle. Dinah, the beautiful one. Go away. I don't know what you're talking about. My only treasure was my son, Joseph. My only son. They said wild beasts killed him. Brother Jacob, may he rest in peace. But Jacob, Dinah, your daughter, is still alive. Dinah is alive. So this is a custom called a bride price. In the Hebrew Bible, it's called the mohar. That's what they're bringing. And if you recall from the previous clip, that's Leah, Dinah's mom. Oh, Abraham. Oh, God. How have I sinned against you? I had a daughter. Daughters are raised to do honor to their mothers, and all Canaan has trampled on my honor. And what about my sons? Where are you? Where have you gone? Jacob, your father, is powerless. Jacob, your father, oh, I said that already. And his daughter is the whore of Canaan. Oh God, hear me. The gazelle's milk will not be mixed with the hyena's droppings. Leah, calm down. Great and noble lady. It's the will of God and you must accept it. All right. Right before this scene, Esau has a monologue. He's still watching everything from the mountains. He sees this interaction about to happen, and he says, I've got my own justice claim. Jacob and I, as brothers, were bound by the honey of justice, but he stole and ate all the honey. So, God's on my side to bring me vengeance. That is Esau's idea of justice. What is Hamor's idea of justice in this situation? You said restoration? A transaction? Oh, restitution. Bribery. You're African. Hamor has an idea of justice that includes some process, whether you call it bribery, restitution, respect to cultures, right? Bribery, restitution. He and the people he came with have some process in mind. And I would add that their process includes this assumption that we need to maintain honor. With every interaction, it was, let me say the right things to show my respects to Jacob, to Joseph who's dead, to Dinah, to Leah, right? That's how they're thinking about it. What about Jacob? What is justice in this situation? It's all about Joseph. There's one top priority that is justice interest. If it's not about that, it's not justice. And what about Leah? What's justice for her? You said honor? She mentioned her honor being trampled on.
But also, they make it seem that she should be accepting of this gift. So there's an entitlement of you should receive this to restore whatever we broke, basically,
Mm-hmm.
and be okay with it. Like women just steal with it.
Yeah, they said it's from God.
Yeah.
This is. Mm-hmm. She wants her. Uh-oh. You read the whole book, didn't you? She said, Jacob's powerless. I need someone with power. That's justice is going to come from power. They have different visions of justice, and that brings me to the next point that I want to say, talking about inclusion, justice, mutual concern. Liberation is the goal. Just like we saw different visions of justice from everyone involved, liberation can be understood in different ways. I'm going to skip over some of this for time. You can ask me, what did you skip later? But Vincent Wimbush, who I mentioned before, he's pointed out the need to attend to how we interpret texts so we can understand what's going on, especially since how we interpret text has an impact on how we form people and how society runs. There are consequences for how we interpret texts. And so considering that, this goal of liberation needs to take into account the impact that reading, misreading, not reading texts has on the world. Now, here comes the critical part. As hinted at in what we talked about with Hamor and Leah and Jacob and Esau, different visions of justice, there's not a singular black agenda on what liberation means or how to achieve it. This is Adolph Reed Jr., no relation, and he has a long career of making this point that black people are diverse and have diverse interests and visions of liberation. He argues that looking at the political, economic, social, and historical context of specific moments, of specific movements, of specific groups, shows the interests of that group or that individual. There's not this singular century-spanning freedom struggle, but rather when we look closely, we can discern differences. And here's a really critical and important part. Reed emphasizes how the vision for liberation championed by one group claiming to be, in their name, this is a pro-black vision for justice, can actually be against the betterment of the lives of most black people. It might be in the interest of some black people, like the one who's saying it, but not the majority. And if that's the case, then it makes the question of liberation very contentious. I'm going to give you some examples that show how thorny this can get. Reed makes this claim with critical judgment on a bunch of different groups that are still making a difference today. So he says, the anti-racism movement focuses on disparity between groups as a vision for justice, but their focus on disparity perfectly aligns with and even justifies inequality, just as long as that inequality means that beneficiaries are properly diverse. He argues that Afro-pessimism undercuts the pursuit of solidarity with non-blacks and thus can render political efforts dead in the water. I think that's the right term, dead in the water. He says this idea of the organic black intellectual that we see with Henry Louis Gates, with Cornel West, Michael Eric Dicey, he says they profit individually while ventriloquizing, speaking for mute masses of people, and in that way undercut democratic processes of debate that should happen with everyday people. He says black nationalism urges an anti-poor conservative agenda of self-help. He says the Black Lives Matter movement involves a race reductionist equation for understanding justice that can obscure the actual causes of the same injustices that they're trying to address, and more and more. Now, if there's any validity to Reed's critiques, and people with that name tend to have good ideas, then a major takeaway is that all of these examples are black voices that speak for the black community, but have agendas for liberation that can discount, not help, or even harm many or most black people. So, turning from this to biblical studies, the question, the thing I'm wondering about is if there is a warrant in African American criticism for the type of heated disagreement concerning liberation that Reed does as a political scientist. Admittedly, there are examples among black biblical scholarship where authors don't bite their tongue in critiquing what they see as oppressive, even when it's coming from black interpreters. But usually, that's limited to jabs at theologically conservative, politically conservative, socially conservative perspectives. What I haven't seen as much of and wonder about is the type of disagreement about visions of liberation that's like what Reed is doing. And so the way that I'm thinking about this question is, should, on the one hand, scholars who are invested in African American biblical criticism strongly denounce articulations of liberation they don't agree with because the wrong goal can lead us in the wrong direction? Or, in a time where political lines are so sharply drawn, the us and them is so sharply drawn, is it wiser to hold back on those sort of critiques? Because if it's us versus them, we don't want to be fractured. It's not an answer. Well, I mean, y'all might have the answer. I don't know. But that's the question I ask. All right. The last one that I'm going to go through is mutual concern. And for the sake of time, I'm going to skip the movie clip this time. Oh. Hamor has suffered, you know what happens, Anne Mariah. Jacob's sons went and massacred the people from his village, his town, his city. And that includes his son, his beloved, Shechem. And so he's sitting here destitute, and Jacob finally leaves his tent to come and talk to Hamor. And they show mutual concern for one another. That's the third thing, mutual concern for one another. In this time of grieving, in a time when Jacob knows that it's his own people who have done this wrong, he's showing concern for the sole survivor, the one he can relate to as another father. This mutual concern. And so, oh, that's nice. And so, fast forwarding through that, we get to Esau comes with his vengeance, but it doesn't end up, he doesn't commit violence against the people. He wipes out what they need to live. And Jacob wrestles with God. Anyone remember that story from Genesis? Jacob wrestles with God. Sissoko has an interesting vision on how to do this. He presents God as a congregation of little kids. It's like 20 little kids. And Dinah is actually part of who God is. So there's a bunch of little kids, and one of them is taller than the others, and that's Dinah. And they're all contending with Jacob. And in the aftermath of this appearance of God, this wrestling with God, there's some resolution among this conflict over justice. And so the mutual concern turns to Esau and Dinah, who actually are standing together at a point, giving advice to the brothers on how they're going to survive, telling them, hey, there's food in Egypt, you know what happens next. And they're going to travel to Egypt. And this is the second to last shot in the movie, and they're watching the brothers walk away. And so, with this idea of mutual concern, I'm not going to launch into how African American criticism would benefit from a theophany and divine intervention. But from this shot in the film, I want to imagine that in some way, hopefully, thinking through these type of critical questions can lead to a sort of having a vision in the same direction, even while there is distinction between who's looking and their understandings of difference. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for that lecture. So we have time now, or about 15, 20 minutes for some questions and answers. And one of the questions I just wanted to start off with, there are so many different biblical interpretations out there in the world. What kind of advice can you give to people? Like, how do you choose the biblical interpretation that works best for you?
That's a good question. What I teach my students in their Intro to Bible class includes this idea that you have to own your interpretations. And so I try to teach students how we make meaning from texts, not what texts mean. And as anybody learns how we make meaning, you get to learn that you have a choice to use different value systems that are going to influence how you make meaning, different sources of authority for how you make meaning, different ideas of what the Bible is for how you make meaning, and that you have to own it at the end of the day. You can't stand back and say, this is just what I believe because this is just what it says, right? And so that's how I teach it as a process, that people have to own themselves. And I think it takes time to figure out what is best for you. But at the end of the day, someone's value system is one of the highest things. Figuring out what's important to you, what are the things you don't compromise on, is probably near the top.
Okay, thank you so much.
Question.
Absolutely. Other questions?
Ellis?
Yes.
When you were talking about the critique of the liberation, because there could be different, do you feel that this critique should be voiced more to the scholars, the academics, the people that are pushing out literature, or should this be a grassroots, the preachers, the churches saying, hey, liberation, because that lens could look different, because if it's grassroots, it has to be one message. But if, I don't know, what's your thoughts on that?
That's a good question. I don't think that it should be limited to small circles of academics. In general, I think that there is a oppressive interest that's served by making political questions like what liberation is divorced from everyday life. So as long as you can, plug out and do everything else, right, and then choose to vote or not on election day, I think that serves a certain agenda that would be counteracted by churches and other forms of communal gathering and regular practices among people being places where people continue to debate interests and ideas of liberation. So yeah, I think that it should be outside of those small circles.
Okay. Other questions?
Adrian.
I'm loud.
No, it's okay. No, I still need to use the mic.
Let me say, decolonizing research methodologies. What would be your suggestion on, like, using this kind of medium is a display of a decolonized research methodology right there. What other mediums did you use for your book or those things? Question.
Yeah. Thank you, Adrian. I think that decolonial studies is one of several methods that people can take for similar aims, and it's just not one of the ones that I was using in my book. That's just not the method, although there might be. There are similarities in terms of results that come out of it. things that I used in my book included critical race theory. It included attention to the history of consequences, which is often part of what happens in decolonial theory, right? So yeah, there's parallels, but that's not how I situated or marketed my book.
Thank you so much, Dr. Reed. Appreciative of all that you brought for us. I'm wondering, thinking with you with Vincent Wimbush, and not to go too far down some of his theorizing, but scripturalizing, processes of scripturalizing, and building on your question with regard to class, removing it from this generation class, which my colleague Dr. Hong and I are teaching a class on. Would you reflect with us on the scripturalizing of capitalism and how that process is so operative, we're seeing currently with regard to erasures around this consolidation of meaning and power from the scripturalization of capital in the U.S.?
Yeah, that's big.
That's, we can be here for another 4 hours.
Yeah. So there are so many ways in which capitalism is normalized as inevitable, merited, beneficial, and can absorb different types of protest and critique without being fundamentally challenged. And I think that what Wimbush looks at in terms of the roles of world making that happens from what we do with the Bible. So the meaning making that happens with what we do with the Bible, the interpretations and how they're part of that process, is where there'd be an intersection between what he's doing and a bigger understanding and critique of how dangerous capitalism is. Does that fit with what you were asking about? Yes.
Okay.
No other questions? All right, let us thank Dr. Reed for this lecture.
Well, again, we thank Dr. Reed for an insightful, inspiring, and deeply impactful lecture and presentation. And we look forward to your book signing here at Louisville Seminary on March 3rd. Wonderful. There it is. Thank you so much. Again, let us thank Dr. Reed. It's been a wonderful evening, has it not? Thank God.